The moment my father pointed at the door and said, "This celebration is for people who matter, and that's not you." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just looked at him. Then at the room full of relatives pretending not to stare, and I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I had already taken 2 steps toward the exit when my brother-in-law touched my sleeve. "Dr. Calloway," he said quietly, "please, don't go." The room went still. My father's face did something I had never seen it do before. It cracked. "My name is Sarah Calloway. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house where success was measured in a very specific currency, steady paychecks, familiar faces at the dinner table on Sundays, and a career my father could describe in 1 sentence to his friends at the Legion. My older brother became an electrician. My younger sister married a man who manages a lumber supply company in Barrie. These were the acceptable paths. These were the ones that earned a seat at the table. I became a trauma surgeon. But for most of my family's memory of me, I was something else entirely. I was the girl who left. I want to be honest about something, because I think the honest version of this story is more important than the clean version. I was not a perfect child. I was restless and stubborn, and I argued with my father about nearly everything from the time I was 15. When I got into the University of Toronto's undergraduate program at 17 and told him I wanted to go into medicine, he sat back in his kitchen chair and looked at me the way someone looks at a pipe that started leaking, like a problem he didn't have the energy for. "You'll run out of money," he said. "You'll be 35 before you earn $1, and by then you'll owe more than this house is worth." I told him I had already applied for every scholarship I could find. I told him I had a plan. He told me plans were for people who had someone to bail them out when things went sideways. What I heard underneath that was, "I'm not going to bail you out." And he didn't. Not financially, not emotionally. When I left for Toronto that September with 2 duffel bags and a used laptop, my mother hugged me for a long time at the bus station. My father shook my hand. It felt like a dismissal. The next 7 years were the hardest of my life. And I say that having later stood in operating rooms for 9-hour stretches with someone's life literally open on the table in front of me. I worked nights at a 24-hour pharmacy on Bloor Street through my undergrad. I ate a lot of rice and canned chickpeas. I had a roommate who played bass guitar at 2 in the morning and another who kept a pet rabbit that was not technically allowed in our lease. I called my mother on Sundays and she would fill me in on everything at home. My brother's new truck, my sister Claire's relationship with a guy named Derek, my father's back pain, and I would listen and ask questions and try not to notice that she never once said, "Your father misses you," or "Your father asks about you," because he didn't, not once, that I knew of. When I got into medical school, I called home. My mother cried. My brother said, "Holy cow, Sar." My father said, "That's a long road." 3 words. That was it. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was doing this for myself, not for his approval, and mostly I believed it. Mostly. There was one night in my 2nd year of residency. I was 28, working at Sunnybrook in Toronto, and I had just come off a 40-hour shift after a multi-vehicle accident on the 401 brought in 6 critical patients at once. I sat in my car in the parking garage and I called home because I needed to hear someone's voice. My mother answered. I told her about the shift. She listened. I asked if my father was around. There was a pause. "He's watching the game," she said. Can you tell him I called?" "Of course, sweetheart." He never called back. I stopped trying after that. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a letter. I just stopped. I focused on my work. I completed my residency. I did a fellowship in trauma surgery at a hospital in Halifax, and then I was recruited back to Toronto to join the trauma team at Toronto General. By the time I was 32, I had been part of surgical teams that had, quite literally, held people's hearts in our hands and returned them to their families. My father did not know any of this in any real detail. My mother knew. I think she told him the broad strokes, that I was a doctor, that I was doing well. But she had stopped pushing him to engage years before. Claire knew too, though we weren't close. She had stayed in Sudbury, married Derek, had 2 kids, built exactly the life my father had always envisioned for all of us. I didn't resent her for it. I just didn't really know her anymore. Which is why it surprised me when she called in March and invited me to her wedding. She and Derek had broken up 2 years earlier, something I'd heard through my mother in passing, and she had apparently met someone new, a man named Marcus, at the hardware store where she now worked as a manager. The wedding was going to be small, family only. June. At a rented hall in Sudbury. I want you there, Claire said on the phone. She sounded nervous. I know things have been weird, but you're my sister. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I want to tell you exactly what I was thinking when I drove up the 400 that Saturday morning in June. I was thinking about how to be invisible. I had learned, over the years, that the safest version of family events was one where I didn't require anything from anyone. I didn't need praise. I didn't need acknowledgement. I just wanted to be there for Claire. Eat some chicken and drive home. I had worn a simple navy dress. I had left my hospital ID and my credentials and everything that marked me as anything other than just Sarah in my apartment in Toronto. I did not want to make it about me. I never do. The hall was one of those banquet spaces with burgundy carpet and round tables and artificial flower arrangements on each one. I arrived a little early and found my mother near the entrance, and she held my face in her hands for a moment, the way she always did when she saw me, like she was checking that I was real. She looked older. Her hair was fully silver now. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," I said. "He knows you're coming," she said quietly. I told him. "Okay," I said. She searched my face. I gave her the most reassuring smile I had. I found my seat. I had been placed at a table near the back, which I noted with a feeling I refused to name, and I said hello to an aunt I hadn't seen in years, and a cousin who had been maybe 12 the last time I'd visited and was now apparently finishing a trade certification in Timmins. We were talking about his program when my father walked in. He looked the same, mostly. Broader through the shoulders, more gray at the temples, the same deliberate way he moved through a room like he was mentally cataloging everything in it. He was with my brother, who spotted me first and lifted his chin in a greeting that was more warmth than my father had managed in a decade. My father looked at me. His expression did not change. I nodded at him. He looked away. That was the first 5 minutes. The ceremony itself was beautiful, actually. Claire looked genuinely happy, lighter than I had ever seen her, laughing too easily, her hands shaking a little when she held Marcus's. Marcus was tall, calm, with the quiet steadiness of someone who had done something difficult before and come out more settled for it. When he said his vows, he looked at Claire like she was the most obvious answer to a question he'd been trying to figure out for years. I found myself blinking hard at the ceiling at one point, which I refused to acknowledge. The trouble started at the reception. We had moved from the ceremony space into the main hall, and the tables had been reorganized for dinner. I was looking for my seat when I heard my father's voice behind me, not talking to me, talking to my uncle, but carrying the way his voice always carried. "Claire wanted everyone here," he was saying. "So here we are." I kept walking. I found my seat. I sat down. I ordered a ginger ale from the server, and I talked to Marcus's aunt, who was visiting from Winnipeg and who was an extremely entertaining woman who had opinions about every news story from the past 6 months and was not shy about sharing them. I was genuinely enjoying the conversation when my father appeared at my shoulder. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he said. It wasn't a question. I excused myself and followed him to a quieter spot near the edge of the room, by the emergency exit. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at me the way he always had, assessing, somewhere between disappointed and resolved. "Claire invited you," he said. "I understand that." "She's my sister," I said. "She's sentimental," he said. "She feels guilty because she's always felt guilty about how things went. But I want you to know something." He paused. "This is a family celebration. People who've been here, who've been part of this family's life, they're here. You walked away from this family a long time ago, and I think it would be better for everyone if you made your excuses and went back to wherever you came from." I looked at him for a long moment. "You're asking me to leave Claire's wedding," I said. "I'm telling you," he said, "that your being here is going to be a distraction. People are going to ask questions. Claire is going to feel like she has to manage you. I don't want that for her today." I had spent, I think, about 15 years preparing for some version of this moment. I had rehearsed things to say. I had imagined being cool or devastating or perfectly measured. I had imagined saying exactly the right thing that would finally make him understand the shape of what he'd done. Instead, I just felt tired. "Okay," I said. "I'll say goodbye to Claire." I walked back toward the main table. My mother caught my eye from across the room and I saw her face go wrong immediately. She had seen us speaking, she knew that look. She started moving toward me. I shook my head slightly. Not now. Claire was talking to one of her bridesmaids, and she turned when she saw me approaching and her smile started, and then faltered when she saw my face. "Sarah, I'm so glad I was here for the ceremony," I said. "You were beautiful. Marcus seems wonderful." "What's happening?" she said. "Where are you going?" "I just think it might be better if—" "Sarah." Marcus was suddenly there, having appeared from somewhere to my left. I hadn't even seen him approach. He was still in his wedding suit, and he looked at me with a directness that was startling. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said. "Congratulations, really. I hope. Did someone say something to you?" I paused. Behind me, I was aware that my father had followed at a distance. A few tables nearby had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people are pretending not to listen. "I think it's fine," I said. "It's your day. I don't want—" "Sarah." Marcus looked at me steadily. Then he glanced past me and I understood he had located my father. He looked back at me. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "Claire told me. All of it." I didn't know what to say to that. "I called Sunnybrook last month," he said, "to get your work contact information, to send you the formal invitation. The woman who answered told me you were in surgery. I said I was trying to reach you and she asked me to hold, and when she came back, she said, and I'm quoting, 'I'm sorry, Dr. Calloway is one of our senior attending trauma surgeons. She's unavailable during operating hours. Is this a medical matter?'" The table closest to us had stopped pretending. Marcus wasn't finished. "Claire told me your family thought you dropped out," he said. "That you were drifting. She said that was the word. That nobody really knew what you were doing." He said this without judgment, just laying it out flat. "I didn't say anything because I thought it was your story to tell on your own terms. But I'm not going to stand at my own wedding and watch someone tell my wife's sister, a trauma surgeon, that she doesn't belong here." He said the last part loud enough. Not shouting, just loud enough. My father had come to stand a few feet away. I turned and looked at him. His mouth was slightly open. "A what?" my uncle said from somewhere behind him. "Trauma surgeon," Marcus said, still calm. "At Toronto General. Is that right, Sarah?" I looked at Marcus for a moment. Then I looked at my father. "Senior attending," I said. "Yes." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in a banquet hall in Sudbury. Claire made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My mother had reached the edge of the group now and she stood very still, and I could see from her face that she was deciding whether to cry. My father said nothing. For the first time in my living memory, my father said absolutely nothing. My aunt, my mother's sister, a woman who has never once in her life failed to say exactly what she was thinking, said, "Good Lord, Robert." Just that. Just his name, and those two words, and the weight she put on them was enormous. The dinner resumed eventually. These things always do. Someone turned the music back up. Servers came around with the salad course. My cousin from Timmins appeared at my elbow at some point and asked me, in a completely genuine and not at all uncomfortable way, whether I had ever had to do surgery on someone who'd been in a snowmobile accident. Because his friend's brother had been in one in February, and the stories he'd heard were pretty intense, I told him yes, actually, a few times, and we ended up talking about it for 20 minutes, and it was one of the more grounding conversations I'd had all day. Claire found me before the cake. She sat down beside me without asking, and for a moment she didn't say anything. She was holding her champagne glass with both hands. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I mean, Mom told me you were a doctor, but I didn't know the details. I didn't know how far you'd gone." "It's okay," I said. "It's not," she said. She wasn't arguing with me, just correcting the record. I should have asked. I kept telling myself that you were fine because you seemed fine, and it was easier to believe that than to admit that I'd just stopped paying attention to your life. I looked at her. She was crying now, quietly, in the careful way of someone trying not to ruin their makeup. I'm proud of you, she said. I don't think anyone has ever said that to you from this family, and I'm sorry for that, and I'm proud of you. I had not expected that. I had prepared for many things that day, but I had not prepared for that. And so I did the least elegant thing I had done in years, which was to put my face in my hands for approximately 30 seconds while my sister rubbed my back and pretended not to notice. My father came to me near the end of the evening. Everyone else had moved to the small dance floor or was grouped around the bar, and I was standing near the window with a cup of coffee looking out at the parking lot, which is not a glamorous thing to look at but gave me somewhere to put my eyes. He came and stood beside me, and he didn't say anything for long enough that I thought maybe he was just going to stand there and then leave. Then he said, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. You could have told me. I turned and looked at him then, because I needed him to see my face when I said this. I tried, I said. For a long time I tried. I called and I sent letters and I told Mom to tell you things, and every time the answer was silence. I wasn't hiding my life from you. You just weren't interested in it. He looked at the parking lot. I thought you were going to fail, he said. It sounded like it cost him something to say. I thought I'd watched people go down that road and come back with nothing. I thought if I didn't get attached to the idea, it would hurt less when it fell apart. I know, I said again. Because I did actually. I had spent enough years in hospitals talking to patients and families to recognize the particular way people protect themselves from hope. It didn't make it okay, but I recognized it. I was wrong, he said. 3 words again, but different ones this time. I nodded. I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine, I said. I don't think one conversation at Claire's wedding fixes 15 years. I think if you want to know me, that's going to take time, and it's going to have to be something you actually choose. He was quiet for a moment. That's fair, he said. I finished my coffee. Outside, someone was trying to fit an oversized gift bag into the back of a Honda Civic and failing memorably. I watched them for a moment and felt something in my chest that wasn't quite resolved, but was at least no longer knotted. You did good work, my father said. He wasn't looking at me, still looking out at the parking lot. The doctoring, you did good work. It wasn't everything. It wasn't close to everything. But it was the first real thing he'd said to me in a very long time, and I let myself receive it without immediately measuring all the ways it fell short. Thank you, I said. I drove back to Toronto the next morning. I had a shift at 7 Monday and I needed to do laundry, and I had a post-op follow-up call I'd been putting off. Life is like that. The enormous things happen, and then you still have to do laundry. I stopped at a Tim Hortons outside Barrie and got a medium double-double and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before merging back onto the highway. Claire texted me while I was sitting there. It was a photo. The 2 of us at the wedding, taken by someone I hadn't noticed. I was looking at something off camera and she was looking at me, and the look on her face was something I hadn't seen her direct at me since we were children. I texted back a heart. She texted back 3. I don't know what happens next with my father. I'm not going to tell you. It was all resolved, and now we talk every Sunday, and he brags about me to his friends at the Legion. That's not where we are. Maybe we get there. Maybe we don't. I've learned that hope and expectation are different things, and you can carry one without the other. What I know is this. I drove back to a life I built, in a city that needed me, doing work that matters. I did that without his help and without his approval and without anyone pointing the way. The part of me that used to need him to see that, she's still there. I won't pretend otherwise, but she's quieter now. She got what she came for. I've thought about that evening a lot since then. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, but the way you turn something over in your hands when you're trying to understand its shape. What happened at Claire's wedding wasn't really about one conversation by an emergency exit. It was the end of something that had been building for a very long time. And like most endings, it only made sense when I looked at everything that came before it. My father made choices. So did I. His choice was to protect himself from disappointment by never fully investing in the possibility that I might succeed. My choice was to keep going anyway. Not to prove him wrong, though I'd be lying if I said that feeling was never there. But because the work itself was worth doing. Those two choices, made separately and quietly over 15 years, produced the moment Marcus said my name in that hall in Sudbury. Cause and effect. It's rarely dramatic when it's happening. It only looks inevitable in hindsight. I think about what it actually takes to build something real without the support of the people who were supposed to believe in you first. It takes a specific kind of discipline. Not the loud, motivational poster kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that gets you out of bed on a Tuesday after a brutal shift when you haven't slept properly in 3 days and there's no one sending you encouraging texts. That discipline isn't something you're born with. It grows, slowly, out of the repeated decision to keep your word to yourself even when no one is watching. That's what I'd call integrity in its most basic form. Not honesty as a performance. Honesty as a practice. Being truthful about what you're capable of, what you're owed to the people depending on you, and what you're willing to endure to become the person you said you were going to be. I made a promise to myself at 17, standing at a bus station in Sudbury. I kept it. That's the whole story, really. And the intelligence piece. I don't mean grades or credentials, though those mattered practically. I mean the willingness to learn from every hard thing instead of just surviving it. Every difficult case, every failed attempt, every moment of doubt became information. I got better because I paid attention. That's available to everyone. It doesn't require a particular background or a family that believed in you early. What I want you to take from Sarah's story isn't that hard work guarantees a dramatic public moment of recognition. It usually doesn't. Most of the time, the reward for building something real is simply the thing itself, the competence, the purpose, the life that fits. The moment in that banquet hall was real and it mattered to me. But it wasn't the point. The point was everything that made it possible. Whatever you're building quietly right now, without applause, without anyone pointing you toward it, that work is not invisible. It's accumulating. And one day, in a room you haven't walked into yet, it will speak for itself.